Hi, my name is Nachum Segal. A number of weeks ago, I told Yummy Schachter of Charity Bids how amazing last year's Amudim live stream conversation was with Rav Hershel Schachter Shlita and Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg. I told Yummy how amazing I think it would be if a regular balabas would have the chance to speak to Rav Schachter about issues and trivial matters in our community and our heritage. I am so happy that Rav Schachter agreed to do this, and I am honored to conduct this conversation. Thank you, Rav Schachter, for being here today. A few minutes ago, we had the opportunity to daven mincha in the same minyan, and frankly, watching you daven mincha for me is a tremendous musar shmooze. And I remember someone once said to me that when they had the opportunity to be a shamish for Rav Segal, not related, Rav Segal of Manchester Rav, the Talmidim would literally wait outside his office when they knew he was going to say a bracha achrona, or really any bracha, because their best musar shmooze was hearing him say a bracha. I'm wondering if there was an experience in your life where you remember watching a specific person do a specific mitzvah or act in a specific way to you felt like a living musar shmooze.
My main influence was from Rab Soloveitchik, so I would go a few times to stay by my aunt and uncle who lived in Boston to daven at Rab Soloveitchik's minyan on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, once on Simchas Torah. Yeah, we were very influenced by the way he davened, by the way he acted, sure.
I want to, if we can, talk a little bit about the after effects of COVID. And I don't mean long COVID that certain people unfortunately suffer from. I'm talking about the after effects in our community. There are people who thought that certain things would and certain things would not remain in our community after the time of the pandemic. For instance, many people thought that weddings, which we proved during COVID could be held with 10, 20, 30 people with a minimal menu and not such extravagance, might be able to be scaled down after COVID and not imitate the size and the scope of the gigantic weddings that would take place before that period of time. I don't think it's remained that way. I think people have sort of gone back to the way things were. Did you think that there would be some type of musar in the whole pandemic situation that would make people go ahead and live a less extravagant life when it came to these celebrations? Or did you have less confidence and you're not surprised that things have gone in this manner?
I didn't have a minute that things would change.
And when it comes to davening, tefillah b'tzibur versus tefillah in one's home, there are people who had this experience of, for the first time for some people, actually davening in private every single day. And there are those who felt that it was much more meaningful to them. It was a better way to daven. I personally could not adjust well to that and could not wait to get back to a shul for real tefillah b'tzibur. What do you think of the after effects spiritually of this pandemic?
A lot of people had more kavanah when they davened slowly, privately. They could daven out loud. They could hear themselves. One should daven out loud in such a way, it should be mashmir li'oznov. Now that they daven, those who went back, some still davening beichidas, but those who went back to daven, more correct is to daven b'tzibur. And you can't daven so quickly, so they should cut back a little bit. So say less, bridge the Psukah Zim a little bit. Bridge the V'hurachim. It says in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, I think it says in the big Shulchan Aruch also, Tov me'at b'kavana, v'har b'shaloi b'kavana. It's better to say less and to have kavana than to say a lot and not to have kavana. They say in the name of Rabbi Hutner, Zachan L'Bracha, that he coined an expression that it was relevant for his yeshiva and all the yeshivas, unfortunately. Tov me'at shaloi b'kavana, v'har b'shaloi b'kavana. If you're not going to have kavana anyway, so why should you say so many slichas and so many kinnis if you don't know what you're talking about? So say less. So he would cut back on the slichas in Chaim Berlin. But it should be tov me'at b'kavana. It's better to say less of a hurachum rather than to get all the words pronounced, but without, Hebrew is not our natural tongue. We were born in America, so we don't really speak Hebrew so quickly. So if you daven a little slower, you can have more kavanah simply for the Pirush HaMilas.
You alluded to the fact that there are people that still are davening privately. Whether you wanted to be in that position or not, the reality is that your leadership during the pandemic indicated to many around this country for sure how they should behave and what they should be doing regarding their synagogues. Chas v'sholom, I'm not asking if you have regrets about anything that went on at that time, but were there ever any second thoughts, knowing that shuls would be closing and knowing how dangerous that is for shuls to be closed, even in the atmosphere of the pandemic?
We had no choice. There was a suffix sakana. I remember there was a meeting I attended by Zoom. I think it was on a Thursday night. Reb David Cohen spoke first because he had to give a shir or something. And then after him, they had a few doctors spoke and a few rabbanim spoke. So I said, based on what they said, it's a suffix sakana. I said, we should close all the shuls and close all the yeshivas right away. So the rabbanim said, no, we're not going to close it. Within 12 hours, they had to change their position. Within 12 hours, it already became a suffix sakana. I didn't understand what the havamina was. You can't go to shul if you're going to pick up it's a contagious disease. Everyone else is going to get sick. Of course you have to dab mechidas. They had to close the yeshiva. They had no choice. You can't have second thoughts.
And for those who are not yet going back to shul, we need to ask the rabbis, I guess, around the country to do what they can to spur them on and get them back.
Absolutely. The Yerushalmi comments on the pasuk there, Hashem behi matzo. You should search out HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the season of the year when he's most available. The Gemara says Aseres Mei Tshuva. And the Yerushalmi says behi matzo in the location where he is more available. That's bebeis HaKnesses. It's always preferable to daven bebeis HaKnesses rather than to daven at home b'yechidas.
Jumping around to a couple of different topics. When my studio burnt down, I got a call from the amazing Yami Schachter, who you know very well, your son, of course. And he said to me that based on an experience that he had had with his family, he once had mentioned to you that he felt that it was unfair for him to be in that challenging experience because of the good things that he does in a certain area of life. I'm being a little bit vague, but I think you know what I mean. And he mentioned to me that you had said to him that in your own personal experience, referring to a time before you were married and then shortly after you were married, you had been tested with certain nisyonos, and you felt, looking back years later, that one of the reasons HaKadosh Baruch Hu did this was to give you a certain sensitivity. When certain people would come with difficult problems to you that they needed solved or advice on, you'd be able to relate better to them. And he said to me that because of the experience we went through with this fire and so much destruction, we will have an opportunity to be very sympathetic and have extra TLC, so to speak, tender loving care for those who've been through this type of experience. With that in mind, is it hard when situations like that you might have been through, that he was alluding to, is it hard to paskin shilas or to lead people in a certain direction when you know just how difficult the pain is that they're going through, when you can relate to the suffering that they're experiencing? Is it more difficult to paskin shilas for people like that because of the difficulty that you're familiar with?
I don't think it's more difficult. It makes it easier. You can empathize with the person better. You went through problems and you realize everybody has difficulties and challenges, so you feel easier to help them out.
And it's not a matter of thinking you might be not objective enough or too subjective because you can relate so much to it.
No, the sympathy is part of the shaila. How do you have the right degree of sympathy for the person?
Earlier today, there were people who wanted to take pictures with you. And I was wondering what you think of that entire practice. Do you ever sometimes say to yourself, the Rambam never had to go through this. He didn't have to worry about people stopping him in the street to take pictures with him. I'm wondering what goes through your mind when that experience happens.
If it means something to them, to have my picture hanging on the wall or whatever, so can you hear Ratzon? If it gives them a chizuk and shmiras hamitzvah, so good.
When you're at a wedding and the person who is assigned to be the Masada Kedushin realizes that you're in the room, and I think it's happened where they defer to you to be the Masada Kedushin, what goes through your mind when that happens?
I feel very bad because the chassan didn't ask me to be Masada Kedushin. You come to the chassan to make the chassan kala happy, and then he's not happy. So sometimes the rabbi who is asked to be Masada Kedushin will be machabed me to say the Birchas Harrison, but he's still the Masada Kedushin. 2 titles. Right. He's officially the Masada Kedushin, and I'm saying the Birchas Harrison on his behalf.
Is that the better way to go?
Yeah, because the chassan wanted the other person to be the Masada Kedushin. I think so.
Again, just bouncing from topic to topic. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up to you is because certain things about our tradition and heritage sometimes rub me the wrong way. It bothers me when people say Zmiris on Shabbos and they don't use Shem Hashem. Because if one looks into the Zmiris, it's written with Shem Hashem. And I would think, and again, I'm just a balabas who doesn't know much, but I would think that as I lead our Shabbos table in the experience of a wonderful Shabbos meal, I would think that the Zmiros are more of a tefillah, not just words that should be said and sung, more of a tefillah, something that generations past certainly took very seriously. I know how my father and grandfather said Zmiros. It was it was never interrupted. It was never dealt with differently than as if it is a tefillah. And so often I hear that people are not using Shem Hashem during the Zmiros. I was wondering what you thought of that.
I personally usually do not pronounce Shem Hashem in the Zmiris. The Chumrah is based on a Ramo's comment in Shulchan Aruch. It says that if one forgot to say Al Anisim in Birchas Hamazon on Chanukah, you don't have to repeat the benching. On Purim, it's a question, but on Chanukah, because on Purim, there's a mitzvah of Suda. On Chanukah, there's no mitzvah to have a Suda. So if one forgets Al Anisma, you don't have to repeat the benching. In fact, the Gemara says you're not really obligated to say Al Anism in benching. It's only a minig. You're permitted to. It's not a hefsek, and it's a minig that we do. So the Ramah writes, even though one forgot Al Anism, doesn't have to repeat the benching, but after he gets to the Olam Al Yichasreinu, and he says many Bakoshos HaRachman, A, B, C, different things, let him say another Harachman. Harachman Yasalon and Isim and Iflois, Geshem Shasis Alav Sena Bayam Amayim Azman Hazeh, then you say Bimei Matisa Ben Yochanan. Say the whole piyut. But the Ramah says on Rosh Chodesh, if one forgot Yalav Yav in the benching, he doesn't recommend you should say Yalav Yav afterwards, because Yalav Yav you have Elakain Elakei, he mentioned Shem Hashem, and it's an issue of Motzi Shem Shamayim Levatola. So the Mishnah Berurah quotes all the Achrayim who are surprised. Why is it Motzim Sheshmaim Levatola? It's a tchina. It's like Gora from all the other piyutim and all the tchinas that we say. And Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur we say tchinas all the time with Shem Hashem. So they say most don't follow that Ramah, but the Ramah apparently thinks that when you're saying personal tchinas that are not composed by the Anshe Knesset Agdola, you really shouldn't pronounce Shem Hashem. So let's say when you say all the piyutim on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the Ramah would seem to recommend you shouldn't say the Shem Hashem then either.
Would he recommend that to the Shlich Tzibur as well?
I don't know. Good question.
Well, thank you.
It's clear that the ones who composed the Zmiris intended that you should pronounce Shem Hashem because it fits into the rhyme.
Right. Correct. And it's also written with Shem Hashem.
Yes. But the Ramah has this chumrah not to. I remember one of the Rabbanim from Manhattan sent his son to learn in Eretz Yisrael in Brisk, and he came back after a year, and he didn't say Shem Hashem anymore in the Zmiris, and the father was upset. That's what my son picked up in Brisk, not to say Shem Hashem in the Zmiris. Okay.
I could sympathize with that, Father.
Okay.
So 50-50, half of Klal Yisrael says with Shem Hashem and half doesn't, or?
Probably 95, probably 99.
Do not say?
No, 99
say
do
with?
say. Yeah, everybody does say.
Okay.
Very few follow the Ramah.
Right. I have a feeling more people may follow you after this conversation, but I guess that remains to be seen. When one is an Avel, so the tendency is to make sure to daven for the Amud as often as possible. You want to say as many Kadeshim, etc., right? So this is what I was told when I was in Ovel. I was told that if the shul allows you to daven, if the shul says get up and daven, you should never give up the opportunity to daven. However, there is this minig in certain synagogues that if it's Rosh Chodesh, for instance, they may not let an Ovel daven for the Amud. However, if there's a shul that on Rosh Chodesh has no problem with an Avel davening, Is it legitimate for an Avel to say, my minig is I don't daven on Rosh Chodesh? Because I always thought, because of the urgency that we always want, that an Avel always wants to make sure to say as many Kadeshim as possible and daven for the Amud, that this is only an issue of being a shul minig, and there's no such thing as a personal minig of I don't daven for the Amud on Rosh Chodesh. What do you think?
Interesting question. I never gave it any thought. I live across the street from Breuer's Kehillah. Right. So in Breuer's, the minig in Germany was, the Prima Godim was a Galicianer, but he lived in Germany, and he wrote all the Svarim in Germany. So he writes the minig is any time when you don't say Tachnun, you don't allow a novel to daven for an Amud. So Friday afternoon by Mincha, they don't allow a novel, and Rosh Chodesh also. Any day that you don't say Tachnun, they don't have a novel daven for an Amud. They present it as if we have to suffer with the oval long enough all week long, so we have to suffer on the Friday afternoon also. But I don't think that's the reason why. It's like a yontif, like on yontif. We don't allow an oval to daven for an Amud. We want a better Bal Tefillah.
And that's what it's a matter of. But what if the oval is an excellent Bal Tefillah? I do know some that are good Bal Tefillah.
Yeah, then we should probably have the oval daven.
Right, that's what I would think.
It says in Shulchan Aruch like that. If the oval is the best Bal Tefillah, so you let him daven even on Rosh Hashanah, even on a yontif.
I was actually in a situation like that, where Shmooze morning, nobody in the shul knew the nusach, and they said to me, daven, I said, I'm an oval, but I didn't realize that, in fact, I should have done it, because I was the only one there who knew the nusach. But still, can someone refuse? In other words, if there's a shul that says, we allow one to daven, let's say Mincha Mariv, because, with Hallel, etc., Mincha, we allow an oval to daven. Should someone say, or is it legitimate to turn it down and not go up to the Amud? There are people who travel, when people are traveling on the road, they'll go, 70 miles out of their way to make sure to say Kaddish and to make sure to, if they can, daven for the Amud. And here they're right there in front of the Amud, and they're saying, and they're refusing to go up because of this supposed personal minig. And I'm wondering if the personal and shul minig, if a shul minig can be a personal minig. Can someone assume that because they grew up in a shul that don't allow an Avel daven, they themselves should not go ahead and do it?
Probably not. I never gave it any thought, but probably you're right. It's probably not an individual minig, probably a community minig. Right. So if in this community they don't have that minig, you should daven for them. Yeah. Right.
What do you think of the effort to ban alcohol in our shuls?
I think Rabbi Billet did a big mitzvah.
Started the trend.
Yeah, and he deserves a big yashikah for many things. That's one of the many things he didn't allow any alcohol. That's very good. I think they should outlaw it in all the shuls.
So
I think it's scandalous.
While wine and spirits is important in our tradition, I mean, there's a place for it, certainly in our tradition. The issue is, I assume, that just got out of hand at some point.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's certain areas in Jewish life that I think, my impression is that we've become somewhat lenient with. For instance, the issue of Amir La'akum. Many of us are so makbid on certain things, especially when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, and it seems that when it comes to asking a non-Jew to do something for us, we are not nearly as careful how that's done and whether it's even allowed to be done to begin with. It's sort of a consumer-driven trend, I would call it. What do you think? Is there a way to...
I agree.
Is there a way to educate the Hamon Am to be mechazik in this area?
I remember I give a shir Sunday through Thursday, 5 days a week. So I remember once on Thursday, very often I do Parsha on Thursday. If I gave 4 shiurim on Gemara, it's too much. So on Thursday I give on the Parsha. So I remember one Thursday, I told them at the end of the shir, so I mentioned to the boys that this Shabbos is going to be in a certain community. It'll remain nameless now, and I have to give a drush on shul. What area do they need Musar in? So one of the boys in the class screams out right away, Amir al-Nachri.
Wow.
They all have maids, and all the maids do all the malachas. So Shabbos Parshas Noach, I'm not going to bop them over the head to tell them that they're in violation. I'm not going to middle of nowhere. So first I spoke about the pasuk in the parsha, Yom v'layla lo yishbosu, that Nachri Shabbos Chai Misa, that Shabbos only belongs to the Jewish people. The Nachrim have no shaychus but Shabbos. Then I told over a story that I remember we were once in Montreal for a Shabbos, And we were eating on Shabbos morning by a certain fellow, prominent balabas there, who was a big Mizrahi leader, and his father was a big Mizrahi leader. So I told over this story. His father had a maid, and when Rabbi Herzog was the chief rabbi a long time ago, so Rabbi Herzog ate by his father on Shabbos morning. So the father was showing him his library. He had a very good library, but it was dark in the room. So Rabbi Herzog was taking the Svarim to the window, squinting with his eyes to try to read from the Sefer. So the non-Jewish maid came in, she turned on the light. So Rabbi Herzog walked out of the room. So the maid asked the balabas, "What did I do? I always turn on the lights for you." So the balabas told his wife, told the maid that strictly speaking, we're not allowed to ask you to do it. And even if you did it on your own, we're not allowed to gain any benefit from it. That's why the rabbi walked out. If you would have turned on the lights for your own purposes, then we can gain benefit also. So years go by, the father passed away, and the son yarshined the library and the maid, and now Rabbi Gorin is the chief rabbi. So Rabbi Gorin is eating by the balabas Shabbos morning. Balabas is showing him his library. So Rabbi Gorin takes the sefer to the window, and he's squinting, he's trying to look at the sefer. So the maid walks in, she turns on the light, and she sits down, plops down, and she starts reading the big magazine, Look magazine, a life, one of the gigantic magazines. So Rabbi Gorin is looking at the sefer. Then, after 3 minutes, the maid tiptoes out of the room. So Rabbi Gorin says, "What's going on over here?" So the balabas says, because when Rabbi Herzog was here, she turned on the lights and he walked out of the room. And then we explained to her then, if she turns on the lights for her own purposes, then we can gain benefit. So I told over a humorous story. Then I spoke mildly about Amir al-Nachri, that it's not right. So it's interesting, after Musaf, one of the Balabatim, the shul comes over, he says, I didn't say who the family was, he said he's related to the family, the maid just died last week. That's the footnote, the maid just died last week.
Wow, very interesting.
Amir al-Nachri never had too much hatzlacha, and the Tanaim knew that it's not going to have too much hatzlacha. That's how Taisus interprets. So they made a dinner, even if the Nachri did the malacha on his own for the Jew, he's still not allowed to gain benefit, because they knew the Jews would ask a Nachri, and they'd make believe that the Nachri did it on his own. So that's why, to be mechazik, this din of Amir al-Nachri never had too much hatzlacha. They added that chumrah, that even if the Nachri does on his own, you're not allowed to gain benefit.
So it's interesting.
Not right?
Yeah. I asked the question thinking that every generation has its challenges, but it sounds like every generation had this challenge.
Yeah. I remember once we were in South Africa for a week, and we stayed by a balabas, a very fine balabas, and his maid was doing the laundry in the same room where we were eating the Shabbos meal. In the washing machine to wash the clothing was in the kitchen in the dining room. She was washing the clothing from all week long in the presence of the, strictly speaking, is probably mutar, adaita de nafshi. She can do it whenever she wants. She decided she wants to do it on Shabbos, but it's not right.
You mentioned a moment ago about your shir, and my boys asked me what I remember about your shir. And I was thinking about, it's many years ago, of course, and I was thinking about it, and what I remembered was how many people would come in during the Seder time before the shir began to consult with you on halachic issues and to ask you shilas. I mean, it was endless for obvious reasons. But I'll never forget when your father would come in to ask you a shilah or to discuss a Gemara with you. And I always felt that what must be going through your mind, that half of you wants to show him the proper kavod and to exhibit proper kavod to your father, and at the same time he's coming to ask you and to ask you a shaila, and how does that look? And I'm wondering what went through your mind when that was going on.
Don't remember already.
So it was not a unique experience or anything different.
I didn't really appreciate my father that much. He was a very big Talmid Chacham. I was his son. I was close to him, so I didn't appreciate him. But they told me that when he was a Talmid in the yeshiva, he knew all the Nadiv Yehudas. They used to give him a faher. They used to ask him, Mashal Nadiv Yehuda. He would say over the whole argument back and forth and the whole maskana, other things like that. Yeah, children a lot of times don't appreciate their parents enough.
And
I remember for a while we had the chazan in the shul would come, Shabbos Mavarch Ma'ash Chodesh, Yom Tov, he would come. The Chazan was a Satmar Chassid, and he lived in Williamsburg, where the whole community was, but he would come for Yontif. So he used to tell me a few times, you should pay attention to your father's drushes. They're just as good as the Satmar Rebbe's drushes. That was the highest praise he can give, as good as the Satmar Rebbe's. And Taka, a lot of what I say in Hashkafa is what I heard from my father in his drushes and shul. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I said to my boys that your father had a reputation for being an expert in certain areas. That was earlier. I used the term consumer-driven when it comes to some of the things that have that are happening as we speak in our tradition. And Rebbe, you and I have had conversations in the past about Sfiras HaOmer because since I'm so involved in Jewish music, I was always curious what your opinion was. And during COVID, in fact, we spoke about you had given what became a pretty well-known heter or a pretty well-known observation during COVID, that during Sfira, when people generally not listen to music, if they feel because of the loneliness of COVID or because of the isolation of COVID, that the music would help. And I asked you if that was a heter that I could rely on in terms of what I present every day, and you said to me that it's really meant for private people who feel they can benefit from it. But if generally I present a cappella music or more Sfira type music in a regular year, you recommend that I stick with that, and that the discussion about it was only for someone privately, which I totally understood. But in general, to me, and from the position I sit in, it seems like the consumers are basically driving what we do and don't do during Sfira and the 3 weeks. Meaning, there's now a trend in Jewish music, and it's been like this now for 10, 20 years, where there's a heter to listen to a cappella music, which might be, more rock sounding and more, and more lively and exciting than regular music. But because it's a cappella, it's fine because there's no musical instruments. And the Chazonisha music and selections like that, the Hartzik Dveikus music that we would play in the old days during Sfira to make a demarcation between Sfira and the regular year, some might say that's more appropriate. I say it's consumer driven, and I'm wondering if you think that ideally it's probably better for people to focus during that period of time on things like chazonis and slower music than go for what is mutter on the a cappella scene.
Probably is correct.
But we sometimes have to cave into what the consumers want, I guess.
Yeah.
Speaking of Sfira in the 3 weeks, do you think there'll ever be a time where we as Ashkenazic Jews make weddings during the 3 weeks? Especially as it's so difficult to find dates sometimes to make weddings?
Probably will.
It will happen.
Sure. They say that when they first started in Encyclopedia Talmud did so many years ago, so they said it's going to take a long time. When they get to tough, Tisha B'Av, they're going to write, there used to be a fast day, there'll be a Beis HaMikdash. By the time they finish the Encyclopedia Talmud did, Beis HaMikdash will be built, so they have to write, there used to be a Tanis that's called Tisha B'Av. There used to be the 3 weeks and the 9 days, and we won't have anything like
right,
that.
We'll
have happiness.
That. But my question was more a practical question before we get to Zman HaMashiach, whether there'll be a period of time during the start of the 3 weeks before the 9 days where we might say we can make simchas because it's so hard to find time to make simchas at other times. Do you think that might happen? Maybe, because in Sfira, and I just discovered this because I asked someone from Israel about what goes on after Pesach, and they said there's virtually no weddings, and I assume this is true, it's Das Yochid, but he lives there. There's no weddings very, very few weddings between Pesach and Rosh Chodesh Iyar. What happens in America? I said, what happens in America? Motzei Pesach until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, they try to stuff in as many weddings as possible. I'm sure in the old days it was not like that. People were much more guarded about how to behave during Sfira, let's put it that way.
I seem to remember when I was much younger, there used to be weddings during Sfira when a boy was drafted into the army and he wasn't going to be around.
Right.
So they would get married during Sfira and then he would go to the army. I think in Eretz Yisrael also sometimes.
Right, but that may be an exception. Maybe it's not nationwide. But my question is, wasn't there a period of time in America when it was almost unheard of to make a wedding after Pesach until Lag Bomer?
Right.
So we've now seen that
changed.
Right, and now we make weddings till Rosh Chodesh Iyar, until the very end of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Good thing, bad thing?
Minhagim, they're all minhagim. Minhagim come and go.
Right, and is the 3 weeks regarded so much with more respect than Sfira? I don't get that impression. I think people take Sfira as seriously when it comes to restrictions as the 3 weeks. But the 3 weeks you would think should have more of a solemn atmosphere than Sefira, right?
I would think so.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe it'll take longer to start having weddings during the 3 weeks?
Don't know. Remains to be seen.
It certainly does. What would you suggest when someone feels they have an opportunity to be Makarev people who would appreciate a good Shabbos meal, but they know they're going to drive to that Shabbos meal? Is there any way to invite people, if you in fact know they're going to drive, to be there?
One would be in violation of Lifniva, the Sitei Michshol, if you mislead the person into believing that it's permissible to drive. Or if you give the person, he knows you're not allowed to drive, but you give him the ticket. You lend him an automobile. But if the people know that Orthodox practice is that you don't drive, or we tell them in advance, Orthodox practice is that we don't drive, if they don't know. So I'd like to invite you to stay over by me for Shabbos, the whole of Shabbos. And then they say they don't want to stay the whole Shabbos, they'd like to come part of the Shabbos. But I told them Orthodox practice is that you don't drive. So you're not obligated to tell them that it's a skila and a kores. You don't have to tell them the chaymer huisa. Once you tell them that the Orthodox practice, you don't drive, so there's no violation of Lifnei Iver, you're not misleading them. And you're not giving them the ability, you're not enabling them to do the other. They have the automobile, they can drive to the beach, they can drive to the movies, they can drive to Philadelphia, they can drive wherever they want. So then there's no violation of Lifnei Iver, strictly speaking. So you can invite them to come on Shabbos. Rav Hershel Schachter was very strict about that. He told the Rabbanim, if you know the Balabatim going to drive to your home on Shabbos, you're not allowed to invite them, period. But many times there's a way to get around that. You tell them what the din is, you tell them the practice is, you have to tell them it's an Isa Kores, and you're not enabling them, you're not misleading them, and neither are you enabling them to do the other. So strictly speaking, there's no Lifnei Iver.
May I ask you about the biggest mystery in Jewish life? Which is more chashuv, Chassan Torah or Chassan Bereshis?
I don't fully understand why Rav Hershel Schachter said that his father always wanted Chassan Bereshis. That when you begin, that's more important. I thought in the Shulchan Aruch they quote the Gemara, the Shmane Psuk M'Shabbat Torah Yachid Kariyos, it's a special din. The last aliyah, Mezayis HaBracha, about the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, Yachid Kariyos. So there are 4 different interpretations in the word Yachid. So the Ramah quotes from the Mordechai, the interpretation, the Yachid HaMiyuchad, the most prominent person, the most learned person in the shul, should be Chassan Torah. That we read, Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, and Yeshua ben Nun took over. So the rabbi in the shul took over now. You can't say Rav Hershel Schachter died, and then there's no one to ask any shadas to. That's what a lot of people say. They don't ask any shadas to anybody because nobody knows anything anyway, because Rav Hershel Schachter died. Moshe Rabbeinu knew better than Rav Hershel Schachter, and he died, and Yeshua ben Nun took over. And Yeshua ben Nun died, so the local Orthodox rabbi took over. So I thought that Chassan Torah, according to that interpretation, they were. Chassan Torah is the bigger kibbutz. Chassan Bereshis is only a minig that you lay Bereshis on Simchas Torah. Medina di Gemara, you don't lay. That's a Hoysafah that you lay in Bereshis. Medina di Gemara just lay in V'zayis HaBracha.
So if someone wanted to buy you one of them, I should suggest Chassan Torah.
Yeah.
That's the one. Our community, I think, suffers, and I use that word only because the Balabatim often are the ones who are, well, maybe suffering is the wrong word. When it comes to Tircha Tzibura, I think there's a lack of balance between Kavanah in the shul and being careful not to be Matriach the Tzibur. And someone told me a story about the Vilna Gaon that the subject or the topic of Tircha Tzibur is so vital in our tradition that the Rabbanim even hesitated to implement a double parsha on a Shabbos because it would be Matriach L'Tzibur, but they had no choice because of the calendar. They had no choice but to institute. And someone told me a story of the Vilna Gaon, and COVID actually reminded me of this, where there was a blizzard in town. In Vilna, there was a blizzard, and there was no minyan on Shabbos. So the next Shabbos, they wanted to lane 2 parshas to make it up. Tzibur has an obligation to hear the laning. And the Vilna Gaon said that he would not allow them to do that without every member of the shul who was there being approached personally to ask, this is the story that was told to me, to ask, and Saba Eliyahu, we're 9th generation from the Vilna Gaon, to ask directly to the person, to each individual person in the shul, are you Michael that we can go ahead and do this? That's pretty powerful. And I thought of this during COVID because there were people who were reading 6 parashios, 7 parashios, in order to do it. And I said, just make sure, I was trying to communicate to them, if someone just walked into shul and came into this situation Shabbos morning, that now you're reading 7 parashios, I don't know how fair that is, and look how the Vilna Gaon approached it. So I know that's an extreme example and a COVID byproduct. But what, in general, what can you tell me about Tircha Tzibura and what our obligation is when trying to service the community properly?
It's a consideration. They have dinim and the Gemara that are based on Tircha Tzibura. Okay.
Someone once, I was at a minyan, they had taken out 2 Torahs, it was Yom Tov morning, and I said to the gentleman, why don't you take the second Torah into the other room and roll it to the proper place for maftir so people don't have to wait. He said, no, it's very close, it'll just take 2 minutes. I said, oh, we finally have a shiur for Tircha Tzibura if it's 2 minutes or less. And I thought it was, somewhat inconsiderate of him because it's such a vital topic, but I guess there needs to be a good balance.
In the yeshiva, Rabbi Lichtenstein introduced, when he was still in America, introduced the practice on our Rosh Hashanah. They finished davening Musaf, it's around 2:30 in the afternoon already, it's late. So the Chayyim says that Suras Yontav is a Surah Gedolah, and you're not permitted to eat a Surah Gedolah before you daven Mincha. On a regular week, they're going to eat a tuna fish sandwich or something, that's right. Okay, even though you didn't daven Mincha. But Yontav takes a long meal, long time, Surah Gedolah. So we still have the practice. The small group stay behind after Musaf. Everybody leaves, and then we have a minyan, 20 people. We daven Mincha. So we leave out Avinu Malkeinu. So someone asked, but in the Siddur it says you got to say Avinu Malkeinu. So I said, do you know the reason why we don't say Avinu Malkeinu after Musaf? Because it's late and people are hungry. That's the real reason, because Tircha Tzibura. So if you're davening Mincha after Musaf, so they're hungrier, it's later. It's a half an hour later. So you certainly leave out Avinu Malkeinu. A lot of times we leave out tefillas because of Tircha Tzibura, extra tefillas.
I'm going to add that to my Tircha Tzibura story repertoire. That is a good one. That is a good one. I heard someone, I was somewhere and somebody was bragging about and to their credit, was bragging about the dedication that their grandson has to Torah study, which was, again, to be admired. I mean, they were bragging, in a good way, that their grandson is just, learning the entire time. And they said to me that the grandson has made a decision, he's not going to get a driver's license. So I said, why won't the grandson get a driver's license? I thought maybe it's, it's Bittul Torah, it takes time. Because if he gets a driver's license, then his parents may ask him to drive this one here, to do favors for them, and that's going to take away from learning. And I was curious what your reaction is to that story.
You have to be a little more of Mabrias. I don't think that's right. There's a mitzvah to learn by Hasmada. The Gemara has a machlokes, what's the definition of Hasmada by learning? But whenever the obligation to learn is when you have free time. When you don't have free time, there's no obligation to learn. It's not that eating a meal and going to sleep and making a parnas is such a big mitzvah that is derech the mitzvah of Hagisa v'yom v'layla. The whole chiyuv in the first place, the Vilna Gaon says, the whole chiyuv to learn in the first place when you have free time. So whenever there's a mitzvah of kibbud aviyim, whenever there's a mitzvah of chesed, gemilas chesed, to help other people, so you're not supposed to learn that time. That's not free time. You're have to do the mitzvah. A person's going to say, he's busy learning, so he doesn't have to daven mincha, he doesn't have to prava seder. No. Limud has to be Layman amanas lassos. The person is only going to be learning and he's going to ignore the mitzvah of gemilas chasadim. That's not right.
There's a debate about where to say Elokai Neshama in the morning. Whether it should be attached to another bracha, or whether it should be, as most of our Siddurim have it, as an independent paragraph. And I've asked this question of Torah giants before, and there's different opinions, of course. I was curious, what do you think the right practice should be?
I thought that it says in Shulchan Aruch that it should be right after Asher Yotzar.
So if our Sidurim printed in a different place, Mimanavshach, still it has to be said at the right time.
I thought so. I think a lot of Sidurim do have it printed right
Right,
after
there's
Asher
some,
Yotzar.
but there are many that have it after Birchas Torah.
Yeah.
Do you think there are different rules when it comes to sukkahs? Do you think there are different rules for those who live in private homes and those who live in apartment buildings? Is there a built-in tircha, a built-in sar, when one has to schlep the food up and down, and when eating in the sukkah is so much more inconvenient?
Yeah.
And we're both
okay.
apartment dwellers, I believe, so
Yeah.
it might be a weighted question.
In my apartment building, there used to be one sukkah for the whole building, and they had a lottery: who has the right to eat by the first shift, who can eat by the second shift,
Very
who by
familiar.
the third shift. Now the building has quite a few sukkahs, and you can eat. And the shul has a sukkah also, so you can eat wherever you want. Now there are no more shifts. Yeah, that's the obligation. 30 days before Yontif, you have to figure out where you're going to daven on Rosh Hashanah, where you're going to eat in the sukkah. Shloshim Yom Kodem HaChag, you have to start preparing in advance and figure out where's your sukkah going to be to make it as convenient as possible. Can't wait till sukkahs and then say, I'm at Star Potter Mal Sukkah. The closest sukkah is a mile away, so I'm Potter. That's what the 30 days is all about. You
Right, but when
when
one's closest sukkah is still a tircha.
Yeah. No, that you have to go to your children for sukkahs then, or go to your parents, or go to friends.
Are there any legitimate shidduch questions? I'm sure you've heard all the questions about shidduchim, whether they use plastic tablecloths, or what type of shoes he wears, and what he does or doesn't do on a daily basis, etc. Are there any legitimate shidduch questions? Are there questions that deserve to be asked and deserve to be answered truthfully?
Sure. I remember my wife read a shidduch with one of the boys in the yeshiva, with the daughter of a prominent member of Broyas. So the girl's father asked one question to my wife: if the boy will have a shaila, will he ask Rabbi Broyer or will he ask Rabbi Schwab? So she said, he'll ask my husband. So he couldn't say no based on that. They got married and they live happily ever after, and they're marrying off all of their children now. It was a good shidduch. That's a good question.
Who will they ask their shilas?
Who will they ask their shilas to? Does the boy have a lot of boys, they learned in yeshivas, but they don't have a rebbe. They don't ask shilas to anybody. That's not a good siman. There are questions that the boy and the girl have to discuss. There was one acquaintance of mine, a friend of mine, who got married. He was very picky until he finally got married. It took him, he must have been in his 40s, I think, when he finally got married. And then after he got married, he finds out that the girl doesn't want to have any children. That's what he was waiting so long to marry a girl. So he got divorced a week later. It was ridiculous. That they have to discuss that on dates, or they have to make sure that it's assumed, what's assumed, that you're interested in having children. The girl never mentioned it to the boy. She doesn't plan to have any children. You have to make sure that they're on the same level of religious observance, or they're striving to become more observant. Or if they both don't want to be observant, they gotta decide that before they get married. You're going to have one is going to be observant, one is not. It's going to cause friction. That's a very important question.
Rebbe, you and I over the years have had a conversation or two about Har HaBayit, Yerushalayim, Israel. You've said to me that as long as the Rabbanut has a certain position with Har HaBayit, you felt that rabbis around the world, or at least yourself, should fall in line with that position in terms of visiting there, etc., which I, of course, totally respect. I was just wondering, what do you think the role is of diaspora Jews in general when it comes to Yerushalayim? There are those who say if you don't live there, you shouldn't have an opinion, and certainly shouldn't publicly voice an opinion about what goes on there. Others have said to me, you know what? Maybe with Israel that's the case, but Yerushalayim belongs to all Jews, including those in the diaspora. What's your perspective on it?
I think it's important that the Jews and Chutz La'aretz should let their opinion be heard. I think it's very important. I think we do have the right to express our opinion.
Split the difference between Yerushalayim and Israel, or even the entire?
That's the Eretz Yisrael also, yeah.
And that would mean? again, with all due respect, that when it comes to the Har HaBayit issue, we should also make our voice heard, whether it's in line with the Rabbanut or possibly not.
A shaila of halacha, so if the Rabbanut takes a stand, so we should try to impress upon the Rabbanut. Maybe they should change their position.
Right.
Okay. But we shouldn't openly disagree with them. The OU used to have a convention on Thanksgiving weekend every other year.
Right.
Good used to have every year, and the OU used to have every other year.
The election was always the OU president. They would
Yeah.
announce a new president.
Yeah. So I think the last two conventions maybe were in Yerushalayim. So I remember at one of them, I forgot already who the president of the OU was at that time, he said that the Israeli government, when they were talking about withdrawing from Gush Katif, from that section, they were only concerned about what the Orthodox Jews in America are going to say. And because the OU always had the policy, they don't take a stand on Israeli politics. So because of our silence, that's why they gave away Gush Katif. So the president said, from now on, we can't follow that position. It's our fault that they gave away Gush Katif. And all the rockets that they're sending to Eretz Yisrael from Gush Katif is all our fault. So he said at the next convention, which was also in Yerushalayim, he said, we can no longer follow that position. We have to let it be known what our position is.
Wow. Does it frustrate you how much disposable income is in the Jewish community and how it's being utilized, especially in light of how many people really need it?
That's what Moshe Feinstein once said at an Aguda convention. He once got up, that's how they say, he once got up and he said, they asked me, Shilas, they want to name a baby girl after a man. How do you convert a male name into a female name? How do you convert a female name into a male name? How come nobody ever asked me where to tell tzedakah? If I have X amount of money, and I only write shuvas when they ask me Shilas. So when he sat down, someone came over and asked him, how should I divide it? So he wrote a tshuva then about it. They ask ridiculous, sometimes they ask ridiculous Shilas, and the most important Shilas, where did distributed tzedakah to? They don't ask. They do on their own.
In general, what is your perspective on being guests in a foreign country? We spoke about Israel and the influence that we, and now you've really educated us in terms of the obligation we have to be involved in what's going on in Israel. I was not familiar with the OU Gush Katif story. But the way we behave as guests in a foreign country, it seems that compared to other times in our history, we've gotten very comfortable here in the United States. And I wonder if that strikes fear in you, if it's not a concern. What's your perspective?
We say in the Haggadah every year, the Jewish people, when they go into Golus, have to have in mind that we're only there temporarily. Sefer Hasidim says that a Jew in Chutz La'aretz should never build a brick building. You can buy a brick building, but you shouldn't build a brick building. A brick building means you plan to stay here for a long, long time. Unfortunately, many Jews in many communities build not only brick buildings, they plan to stay there after 100 years after Mashiach comes, with too much shakua and chutz la'aretz. What are we davening? We're always davening, please bring us back to Eretz Yisrael. We have the bravery to go back to Eretz Yisrael on our own. The doors are open. The Israeli government is inviting everyone to come to Eretz Yisrael. Maybe you won't be the multimillionaire that you were before, but you can lead a wonderful life there. I remember once, I tell this story to my students, I was once speaking for the OU in Los Angeles. They used to have Yom Yedikal, Yarchei between December 25th and January 1st. A lot of students in graduate school have off, and a lot of businesses are closed. So they used to have a whole week of shiur. Now they just have a weekend. But then years ago, they used to have a whole week. So I remember I was there for a whole week, and then I was taking a plane, an El Al plane, to go back to Eretz Yisrael. So the plane took a while till it took off. It didn't leave on time. I saw someone go from the business section to the back, to the washroom. He looked very familiar. I didn't remember exactly how I knew him. And then when he came back to walk back to the front, he stopped by my seat and he said, "Hi, Reb, how are you?" It was in my shiur 20 years earlier, whatever. So I remember he was wearing jeans and sneakers without any socks. So I say, what are you up to? What do you do for a living? So he tells me he's a radiologist. He used to live in Los Angeles, and he used to make $2 million a year. I can't count so high, $2 million a year. And now he is married with children. They all moved to Eretz Yisrael. He bought a home in the poor section in Savion, where the poor people live. And he only, in Eretz Yisrael, he only makes $500,000 a year. His wife cannot get used to living in poverty. He only makes $500,000 a year. I was going to give him a $5 bill. Nebuchadnezzar didn't have socks to wear. I was going to donate $5. And he says he came back to Los Angeles to try to get back his job in the hospital where he used to be the doctor. Make $500,000 a year, that's not enough. That's a little ridiculous. We all have a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. You have to provide chutz la'aretz with rabbanim. So that's Rav Soloveitchik used to say those in chinuch rabbanos are not allowed to leave. He was very upset when his children moved to Eretz Yisrael. He always used to say that anyone who's in chinuch rabbanos are fighting assimilation, fighting intermarriage, and they have to stay. They have to stay. He used to say the marshal that the general in the army is not allowed to leave until all the soldiers are accounted for. The captain of the ship is not allowed to leave until all the passengers are accounted for. So I used to laugh in my heart, what captain of the ship, what general, what kind of Mishalom is giving? Then years later I saw that's the expression, the Maharam Shik has such an expression. One of his Talmid, the Maharam Shik, was the Talmud of Nachum Segal, and they were fighting reform. After the Nachum Segal died, reform got stronger. So the Ksav Sefer, the son of the Nachum Segal, and the Maharam Shik were the main generals fighting reform movement at that time. So one of the Talmidim of the Maharam Shik, who had a rabbanus in Hungary, didn't enjoy. He was successful fighting reform. He didn't enjoy. He was offered a rabbinical position in Eretz Yisrael in the late 1800s. So he grabbed it. They were going to give him a salary. He should sit and learn and pass shados and give shiurim and shine. So that was great. So he was packing his belongings to move to Eretz Yisrael, and he sent a letter to his Rebbe, to the Maharam Shik. He should give him a blessing on the move. So he writes back, I can't give you a blessing. You're doing shaloi kedin. And he writes, when you were a student in my yeshiva, we had no right to draft you into the army to be a general, to fight reform. Many of your classmates went into business, but you volunteered, and you were a successful general. And he writes, the general in the army is not allowed to leave the front, and the captain of the ship, exactly word for word. And that's the letter, the Maharam Shik's tshuva, that's the letter that Rab Chaim Ozer wrote to Rav Kook. Rav Kook was negotiating with Rab Chaim Ozer. He should retire from Vilna. He should move to Eretz Yisrael. Rav Kook is going to be the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. Rab Chaim Ozer will be the Reish Kol Bnei Agoylo. That's going to be his title, chief rabbi of the rest of the world. And they had a home for him, they had an apartment, and they had a salary. Everything was covered. And he was going to come. And then the last minute, Rav Chaim Ozer sent him a letter. The letter is printed, that the Rabbanim of Vilna say that he's still needed. He shouldn't leave chutz la'aretz. So he quotes this from the Maharam Shik, that just like the Maharam Shik said, that whoever is oisik in Rabbanis and chutz la'aretz. So many Rabbanim and many mechanchim in chutz la'aretz think that the world can't exist without them, and they're holding that's a little bit of a joke. Not everybody is so indispensable, as the expression goes in many different languages. Cemeteries full of all of those indispensable people, and the world keeps on going. But so you have to provide the communities in chutz la'aretz with some leadership, some rabbanim. But we all have the opportunity to move to Eretz Yisrael. We all really should. We really should. We're not going to make the $2 million a year, but we can make the $500,000 a year. We should get used to living in poverty. And $500,000 a year. It's not right. Now we have the opportunity to move to Eretz Yisrael, and everything there is fantastic. The high tech is fantastic in Eretz Yisrael. There's so much fantastic work that can be done in Eretz Yisrael. People getting Nobel Awards for all the things that they're accomplishing.
Rabbi, I hope you enjoyed this half as much as I did.
Very good.
And I thank you very much. And I give you a birchos hedjut, a birchos balabos, that you should continue to lead us with great strength for many years.
Amen. Thank you very much.